Here's a second thought as you continue to read it on. He says, some people just flat out aren't ready to hear. Some people aren't ready to hear. What's our response? We see it in verse 13. We should sow anyway. Look at it in verse 13. He says, those on the rocky ground are the ones who receive the word with joy and when they hear it. But listen to this, they have no root. They believe for a while, but the time of testing comes and they fall away. Now, if you want to underline that word testing, Luke actually uses that word testing, that Greek word testing, two other times. And a lot of times we often hear, and as I did my research and my study and preparing for this passage, oftentimes people say, man, trials come their way. They have financial difficulty, or they get sick, or they are this or that. And there is something to that in that passage. That sometimes, man, if somebody receives the gospel, they hold on to it for a season, but they go through some difficulties. They get drawn away from church or drawn away from the faith. They fall away. And that's certainly an aspect of that word. But if you look at the two other places that Greek word is used by Luke in the Gospels and in the book of Acts, you'll see something a little more intriguing. If you go look in Luke chapter 22, verse 40, Jesus has just instituted the Lord's Supper. He's washed the disciples' feet. He goes out. He's told them, I'm about to be delivered into the hands of sinful men, right? So Jesus goes out and he's praying on the mountain and he tells the disciples, I am going to pray for you so that when persecution comes, you will not fall away. Remember that prayer? That's what Jesus prayed. He prayed for the disciples. And you say, well, what happened, Pastor? Anybody remember Peter? Cock-a-doodle-doo? Right? Jesus prayed that they would not fall away. What did Peter do? This word right here, Greek word. He fell away. Jesus prayed that when we were persecuted, we would not fall away. I think sure he's talking here about difficult times and trials, but more importantly, he's saying, listen, if someone begins to get persecuted for their faith, they will not fall away. You say, Pastor, you said this Greek word was used two other places. You can also find it over in Acts chapter 20, verse 19, where the Apostle Paul, and by the way, Luke wrote the Gospel of Acts. Luke is sitting there recounting what Paul said, and Paul told the Ephesian believers, when I was with you, I did not fall away, even though I was overcome with intense persecution. He says, man, the Pharisees and the Sadducees began to persecute me, but I did not fall away. So the reality of it is, yes, some people may fall away. They begin to move towards the faith, and then all of a sudden a difficulty happens or a hardship happens and they turn away. Other people, he said, they fall away because they get persecuted, they get mocked. You know, all of a sudden they begin to go back to their family. They didn't grow up in a believing family. And what happens, they begin to get a little bit excited about their faith. I know as a young person, and we're not necessarily talking here, by the way, about losing your salvation. That's really not the whole point of the passage. But I can remember many times, and if you're a young person, if you're in college, if you're in here, how many times that I would go to a youth camp or I'd go to something and man, I'd get touched by God. And for those of you who know my story, you know I wasn't a pastor all my life. And there were little times and little seasons when I'd go back and say, you know what, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to go live my faith. I'm going to walk my faith. And guess what? I got in that locker room and began to shrivel up and shrink back and fall away. And all it would take is somebody to mock me just a little bit and I would drift away. What's my call? I'm to sow anyway. Some people are going to shrink back because of persecution.